Welcome to Powerssquared Raw and Real. This is number 25. I'm M.A. Powers.
And I'm J.L. Powers.
So we are going to talk a little bit about a subject that you sent me an article about, and I enjoyed reading it quite a bit. You want to give a little synopsis of that article, and then we'll discuss our thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, to frame the article, I had seen on a Facebook acquaintance's page that said, fill in the blank. I started reading at age, and then she had written in, I started reading at the age of 2. And then there was a lot of these posts of people saying things like, I started reading at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 or all these things. And at one point there was a, one person saying something along the lines of, I don't think, that this is necessary.
I'll be right back. You keep going.
Got it. There was somebody saying, I don't necessarily think that this is a sign of superior intelligence, but, and kind of this, like that kind of phrasing. And I have vested interests in this topic. For those of you that don't know, Matt himself didn't read until he was 10, and my own son just started reading here when he was 7, and I think he's perfectly intelligent and has been perfectly intelligent, even though he didn't start reading until 7. So I knew I wanted to comment, but in a nice way, on this Facebook page thing. And so I went and found, some stuff, and I found Malcolm Gladwell's essay on late bloomers and how, people, we assume in our society that precocity or, being precocious at things is a sign of genius and is a sign of superior intelligence. But he gives tons of evidence to the contrary that shows two possible problems with being an early bloomer or being precocious can result in burnout later on down the road if it's not handled well. But also the corollary to that is that an awful lot of people that are quote unquote late bloomers, actually do well, extremely well later on. And he talks about how it's in some respects seems to be a different style of learning in some respects, that your precocious learner just sort of grabs hold of something and sort of does it well immediately and then kind of flames out at some point, whereas the late bloomer tends to experiment and kind of grow through experiments, and some things don't necessarily pan out the way they expected, but then eventually they get onto something that like really works, and everybody's like, wow, what a genius, but they aren't recognized as this genius or this, creative artist type until they're in their 40s or 50s or 60s. And that there are a lot of examples of that. Even, Albert Einstein was a late bloomer in terms of speech, for example, or, Thomas Edison being a late bloomer in terms of, those are famous examples, but there's just lots and lots of examples.
Well, his primary examples of Picasso and Cézanne are really interesting because again, he was like, Picasso, basically, if you quantitate it in terms of his most popular and paintings that are, and drawings that are worth the most, of course, he peaked in his early to mid 20s, which would be that classical idealized idea of the genius who comes and then burns out and goes, a Mozart who dies early. All of his work happens really quickly and at a young age and is just a freaking genius and then dies out.
Marley.
Cézanne it was such an interesting case because he was not, his stuff was considered all right, good, even into his 30s, not great, but then his masterpieces were all done in, I think when he was in his 40s to 60s. And so that's such an interesting idea. And that the way that he worked, the good news is that those of us who aren't particularly precocious, you know me, I mean, I didn't learn to read until I was 10, still have hope, right? We still have hope. Yeah, we're not dead yet. But no, but the other thing, and I find this interesting, is that those late bloomers really struggled through their art. They struggle and they make changes, and they struggle some more and they make changes, and they struggle and they get to a level of working at things through that struggle. And that it sounds bad in a way, because it seems like the Picassos and the Mozarts of the world could just do it effortlessly, and that's what we all want. We want an effortless life, but it seems like most of those people die young and unhappy. Not all of them, but whereas,
yeah, okay, there's certainly, I don't know if you've seen this, the 27 Club, all these musicians who die at the age of 27. There's a huge, enormous number of them. And of course, they all were famous, but by the time they died, and then they all die at 27. Some by suicide or drug overdose, but some of car crash or whatever. And anyway, so that sort of fits into that. And I don't think either one of us is saying there's anything wrong with being precocious or coming into your talents extremely early. I mean, I think that that's wonderful. We should all celebrate that. But part of the problem with celebrating that as opposed to the other is tied up with our worship of youth culture too.
Sure.
And this idea of, if it's valuable, it's got to be young and beautiful, and we don't value those contributions of people when they're starting to have saggy muscles and their skin is wrinkled, and we don't necessarily value the wisdom and style and talents of experience as much as we tend to value that,
the sparkly, shiny newness.
Right, exactly. But also I love this idea of, this struggle and what that teaches you as a person, not to give up, to be persistent, and to say, you know what, this is something I really have to do, and I have to do it even if other people think I'm mediocre or they're not celebrating it or whatever. I keep going. And I think that there's a sense in which if you struggle to do something, you're not ever going to be happy with some sort of plateau either. You're not going to ever kind of stop and say, okay, well, I've gotten good enough. I'm just going to stop and now I'm going to do this little thing for the rest of my life. There's always a sense in which you're going to reach for more.
Sure.
And that you're continually growing as an artist and getting better, or as a human being, or as a scientist, or whatever. And so there's a sense in which that struggle teaches you.
Yeah, I think for me, I think there's a perniciousness, actually, though. I in this idea of genius. Being young and just being good at things automatically, and I think it's destructive to our culture, quite frankly. And I think we would do good to acknowledge that there are a few people who will be like that, but that's rare, and that it might not actually be a good sign for them emotionally. And that we should think twice about putting those people on a pedestal for the rest of us. And here's why I say that. And part of the problem, I mean, yes, we should put their work and their genius on a pedestal, but them as a people, we should be hesitant, because it tells us as human beings two things. One is that if you're not automatically good at something, you'll never be a genius at it, and it's not worth trying hard to do it, and so you give up at it. And there are probably many people in this world who would have been geniuses, could have been geniuses at something, and were forced out of that because people would not allow them to make mistakes and to continue that struggle until they were good at it. So that's one thing that I think is destructive about culture. And then two, it's very destructive to young people who think that for me to be success, life should be easy. because we make it sound as if these people, you know, they could just play the piano, which may have been true, or they just could paint, you know, just naturally could paint. And so if I can't just naturally do whatever, sing, paint, or whatever, that somehow I will never be good at this. And I think that that's destructive to us regular schmoes too, because a lot of life is just nothing. A lot of life is things become fun after you learn them, but they're never fun and not easy when you don't know how to do it, right? And so we need to teach both our young kids and especially I think the women of the world out there, our young girls, because a lot of times, at least the scientific polls have shown that girls believe very strongly that if I'm not innately good at something, then I'm not good at it, instead of the idea that no one's good at anything when they first start. You have to work hard at it, and then you will become good at it. And so and so I think that we need to allow us just normal everyday folks to struggle through the learning process to get good at things, and not be told, well, you should go do this other thing because you'll never be good at this because you're not good at it already, even though you've never had a chance to do it in the first place. So.
I read a number of years ago, I read this kind of interesting statistic that said, you know, back in the 50s or even before that, most adults would have their career and they would kind of stick with it. You know, I mean, they might go work for a company and they would work for that company the rest of their lives. Or they studied, you know, they were a farmer and they were a farmer all their lives. Or they studied to be an engineer and they were an engineer all their lives. But but in recent times, you know, in the last, say, 25, 30 years, it seems like people kind of reformulate themselves every 10 years and start a new career. And they can be drastically different careers. You know, going from a good friend of mine actually has started a company, for like a website design company straight out of college. And she did well with it, but going into right around the time she turned 30, she was like, I'm going back to school. And she went back to school and became an engineer. And now she's an engineer. And, you know, she's a little like just turned 40 or so a year or two ago. And those are two really different careers. One's
Sure, yeah.
Website design company, an entrepreneur, and another is now an engineer in mechanical engineering. And I think we can see this more and more, that people don't feel necessarily stuck with what they might have started out with. And I think that that's important, to be able to reformulate yourself and to recognize, okay, just because I didn't do this before doesn't mean I can't try, even though I'm 40 or 50.
Right, doesn't mean I can't become good at it, right?
Exactly. And that this can be the norm. This doesn't have to be the anomaly or the outlier out there, that anybody can do this, can say, no, just because I'm 40 doesn't mean I'm stuck doing this the rest of my life when I no longer am happy doing it. I could choose. And maybe it'll mean starting over again and feeling that long hike of moving into a new talent and a new skill and a new career. But it's worth it, because it's also about my growth as a human being. It's also about my personal passions and happiness. And it's not just about, okay, having the same safe career for all my life so that I can then retire and fish from my porch or something. It is about, you know, this is your one life to live. And so anyway, I thought that was an interesting statistic, that people these days seem to change careers every 10 years or so, and that they aren't just little changes, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing that we should value as we age, one is, the ability to change careers and realize that we can be good as we get older, and the other is just raw creativity of older people. A lot of times we I think as a culture just don't, one, recognize raw creativity in older people, and we also just don't look for it, and so we don't see it, and we don't nurture it, and we don't make a positive, like, this is artistic, you know, you should keep doing this. Instead, we're already like, oh, you know, they're way past their creative prime, and that, I think, is destructive. I think we should, people can have raw creativity at any age, and part of it is just believing that you can have it.
Right, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that last thing you said was really important, was that belief that you can have it and that you're not stuck just because at another age, or just because you're at a certain age. And, you know, I mean, I find that really compelling and hopeful to me. I've spent most of my life really acquiring the skills to be the best writer that I can be. And now I've launched this publishing company too, which is acquiring a whole different set of skills as an entrepreneur that are actually related to, but completely different from that skill of sitting alone in a room and creating books, right? They're really, really different skills, although they seem related to people because they're about writing and books and literature, but they're very different. But I know too, you know, I mean, there's things I want to do, not necessarily as a career or whether I'm good at it, but I took piano until I was 16. And right before my son was born, I had a birthday and got keyboards, which I haven't played because I don't have time for them, but I still have them. And I'd like to return to some musical tinkering around. I don't have to be a genius at it. I don't have to be good. But one of these days, I believe I'm going to have time for other art, other types of art. So that's all. And maybe we should end there. Any last thoughts?
Yes. And we too will one day be geniuses.
Yes.
We're going to keep working at it.
Good ending thought. Please visit us at www.powerssquared.com, where we show our genius in depth.
Yes. Another t-shirt, genius in progress, right?
There you go. That's a good t-shirt. We will, yes. And don't forget to read our life-changing book, Broken Circle by J.L. and M.A. Powers. And we'll see you next time on the next Raw and Real.
Bye.